hope is that it will decrease inflammation. So does the specific carbohydrate diet work for IBD? There are a very small number of studies, and again, many of them in pediatric patients. One study in children did show mucosal healing and also clinical meaningful improvement. There are also some case series that have been published where patients were able to maintain, to stop and stay off of their medications. The diet did have a high adherence rate, which is important when you're looking at a diet for IBD, is what is one that you can actually follow long term. So it did have a high adherence rate. Again, not a lot of studies have been conducted yet, and we still need a little more information, I think, on adults. Dr. Cross had spent a little bit of time talking about functional GI symptoms, such as those with IBS, such as gas, bloating, abdominal pain, maybe diarrhea. Sometimes our IBD patients may exhibit signs of functional GI symptoms when they're in remission and they're not flaring. This particular diet, again, has 3 phases: an elimination, a reintroduction, and a maintenance phase. Foods to avoid and foods to include, I think you can see for yourself when you look at the list, it's a little confusing. It's certain fruits, certain vegetables, certain beans and nuts. Definitely, though, lactose-containing dairy is not allowed. Gluten is not allowed, neither honey or high fructose corn syrup, but some other sweeteners are allowed. So there are, again, tools that are available to help patients sort through the diet and to make it work for them. The principle of this diet is not so much having to do with inflammation and healing of the gastrointestinal tract, but has more to do with the tolerance of carbohydrates. So these particular carbohydrates can be poorly tolerated, leading to fermentation and fluid load within the GI tract, which can then cause symptoms such as the IBS symptoms we talked about, bloating, abdominal pain, and gas. So does this particular low FODMAP diet, and FODMAP is just an acronym for the carbohydrates. So does it work for IBD? There have been several published studies on the low FODMAP diet. What we have found is that for IBD patients that are having symptoms similar to those of IBS or functional GI symptoms, that those symptoms do improve if you're adhering to the diet. With ulcerative colitis, with a colectomy, it can help to decrease the daily stool frequency from 8 to 4 in one study. So the results definitely suggest that if you have a functional component to your GI symptoms, that, or maybe even non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that this diet can help to improve symptoms. Again, this is not necessarily addressing a flare or the overall recovery from inflammatory bowel disease. Another diet that is in the literature is the Mediterranean diet. This diet is high in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and also lean proteins. You will limit red meat, processed foods, and sugar. The principle of the diet is that by including things like fish, things that are high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are the good kind of fat, and limiting the omega-6 fatty acids, which are the bad kinds of fat, that may help reduce inflammation. This diet has been promoted or recognized by the Dietary Guidelines of Americans and also the World Health Organization as promoting health and maybe also helping to prevent chronic disease. So, you know, regardless of IBD, it is also recommended for general health. There has been a study called the DINE-CD study, which took a look at the specific carbohydrate diet versus the Mediterranean diet. It was a good study, randomized study over a 12-week period of time, where patients were delivered 6 weeks of meals, you randomized either to specific carbohydrate or Mediterranean, and then for 6 weeks you're to follow the diet for yourself. The primary outcomes that are being looked at are, again, dealing with inflammatory markers. This study, we should hopefully, I believe, have the results maybe by next summer. So that will be something we can really take a look at and see if it gives us any good information about these 2 particular diets. But the bottom line is that diet has not been definitively shown to cause or to prevent or to treat IBD at this time. We do know for sure that we can help with GI symptoms and helping patients to feel better. Currently, we're lacking data to say any specific diet is better than another, or to say, yes, this is the one you should follow and this is going to help or to cure your IBD. We are definitely not anywhere near that yet. But that doesn't mean that you should just eat whatever you want either. People with IBD should also maintain a diverse and nutrient-rich diet. You can take a look at choosemyplate.gov. They have lots of great information on healthy eating. You can also consider taking a look at the Mediterranean diet. Again, it's a diet that has been recommended for overall health and wellness prevention of chronic disease. And it's also important that you also track your own experience with food and keep track of what foods may be triggers for you. During a flare, you may need to alter what it is that you're eating. Smaller, more frequent meals are generally tolerated better. You want to avoid high fat or greasy foods, limit spicy or highly seasoned foods, certainly avoid what you know are your own trigger foods. You want to limit probably high fiber foods during that time to try to decrease stool bulk. You may need nutritional supplements. There's a wide variety of them available. It's not just your Boost and your Ensure anymore. So there are a lot of different options. If you're losing weight, that may be something you want to consider. You also want to make sure you're maintaining your fluid intake and making sure you're not dehydrated, or maybe even including some oral rehydration beverages. But what's really important is that you stay flexible and focus on what you can eat versus on what you're not able to eat at that time. And also keep in mind that during a flare, that's hopefully a period of time, and as you heal and your symptoms improve, you should again try to get your diet back to as healthy of a diet as you can. So in conclusion, maintaining a healthy diet is definitely important for IBD. Everyone is different and may require different strategies. This is where some of the frustration may come in, because what works for one person may not work for another. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of studies right now to say one thing is better than the other, but all of this information is definitely emerging, and we should have more information as time goes on. That doesn't mean that any of those diets may not be appropriate for you to try. But you want to keep in mind, and here's my cheesy comment for the day, that nutrition is a journey. Where you're at now may not be where you're at 6 months from now or a year from now. So things that you may not tolerate during a flare does not mean you will not tolerate them when you're not in a flare. So you may want to consider partnering with a dietitian to discuss your own personal food intolerances and how to maintain as healthy of a diet as you can, and trying to reduce inflammation overall, which can also in the long run help with your IBD. Thank you very much for listening, and at this time I believe we'll go back to questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shelley. All right, so first, this person has a question about, I am a vegetarian, I take vegetables, lentils, and of course, let's see, spicy Indian food, and I have Crohn's disease. How does that affect, how will that probably affect him?
Well, it depends. If you are currently experiencing GI symptoms, You know, you may need, in having a flare, you may need to rely more on cooked foods. You may need to dial down the spices a little bit if you feel like that's contributing to your discomfort. There are lots of patients that are on vegetarian diets, and that is not an issue. You just need to maybe be more careful about the form in which you're eating them, how they're cooked.
Okay, thank you. Can drinking large amounts of diet soda induce a UC flare?
Well, at first, my mantra is always everything in moderation. So I wouldn't recommend that anybody probably drink large quantities of diet soda just for overall health. We don't know, excuse me, that any particular food itself can cause a flare of IBD. So it's hard to say whether that can necessarily cause a flare. If it's caffeinated, that might make diarrhea worse. There's information that maybe some of the alternative sugar, you know, may play a role in diarrhea, and the keeping the health of your microbiome good. Some of those sugar alternatives may not be good for that. But whether or not it actually caused a flare is probably up for debate.
What are the pros and cons of caffeine and IBD/UC?
Well, in general, what we tend to recommend is 1 to maybe 3 servings of caffeine a day, which is in line with general health recommendations. If you are flaring, it's hard because when you have fatigue, you know, a lot of times patients will go to caffeine just to try to get through their day, which is completely understandable. But depending on where you're at with your GI symptoms, caffeine is definitely a gastric irritant. It can definitely speed up and make diarrhea worse. So, you know, you have to weigh the benefits and, you know, the risks of drinking too much.
Okay, great. Next question is, I was under the impression that a food map diet was not for the long term. Can you please explain?
Yeah, so the low FODMAP diet is an elimination diet. So you follow the diet for a period of time. Generally now it's recommended about 4 weeks. And then it requires that reintroduction phase. So for 4 weeks, you completely avoid all high FODMAP foods. Then during the reintroduction phase, you're going to reintroduce 1 new food at a time, a serving of that food each day for about 3 days, and see how your GI symptoms are. So journaling, food journaling is very important during this time. It can get a little bit tedious. This is the step where I start to lose everyone is they want to go back to regular eating and including foods they enjoy. But it's really important to try. You went through all that work for those 4 weeks. So it's really important to try to do it systematically so that you can figure out which FODMAPs bother you, because not all FODMAPs are going to bother you as an individual. So that reintroduction phase, you're really diving into it and trying to figure out which foods are the ones that are your triggers.
How do you choose a diet if you also have type 2 diabetes?
Well, I hate to keep touting dietitians, but if you have a dietitian, they can do both. So having diabetes is not a barrier to having a healthy diet. You should be including the foods and eating a healthy diet just like everyone else should be. And if you have specific needs in terms of, you know, insulin requirements or timing of your meals, definitely partnering with a dietitian would be, you know, a good thing to do.
Great, thank you. Those are all of our questions for now. We want to thank Dr. Cross and Shelley Niemann for being here today. If you have any other questions or would like to make an appointment, please feel free to call the number on the screen at 410-706-3387.
Great, thank you so much.